kind of directed at American companies. But what they're trying to do now is they're also trying to force the Netherlands and Japan to follow the same suit, follow the same kind of bans as well, to not to sell chips to China. And you might think that Japan and Netherlands are following the United States calling, but they're not. They're absolutely not. And you can see from this article, they're not. They're trying to push these countries to follow their line, because the way the United States think, whenever they put any sanctions on a country, they don't want to suffer by themselves. They rather their allies suffer at the same time. And this is what's happening with Russia. They get all the collective West to apply sanctions on Russia. They don't want to do it themselves. And this is what they're doing with China as well. So you can see with this article, US President Joe Biden appears to pressure Japan and the Netherlands even more to join efforts to block the flow of advanced chip technology to China, where it could be used to develop cutting-edge weapons. So it says here, I think you will see Japan and Netherlands will follow our lead, US Commerce Secretary Gino Raimondo said. So she said that I think, she says, I think. It's not, when somebody says I think, it usually means they're not sure. So you can see here, US companies are in strong software used in chips, as well as design software employed to make advanced semiconductors. South Korean and Taiwanese companies handle many products that use US technology, which already is a subject to certain regulation. Japan and Netherlands are subject of US attention because of their strength in semiconductor manufacturing equipment, which so far has not been subject to US regulations. Companies in both countries believe to be able to build products that do not rely on US technology. So the whole point is the US is trying to get their allies to block chip making equipment and also chips to China. And let me show you some things that's happening to the United States right now, and also TSMC. I mean, look at the shares of TSMC, how far it has gone down, especially last few months. You can see NVIDIA, how the shares have gone down, and you can see probably AMD is probably the worst. It went from 160 at one point. Now it's down to 59 or 60. So you can see the United States do not want to suffer by themselves, so they're trying to get their allies to suffer with them. The Chinese industry is a huge industry, and China has been paying up to $400 billion per year for chips, mainly from United States, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan. 400 billion they pay per year. So it's a huge market. And now United States is trying to stop these chip companies from basically selling to China. And the reason American companies are suffering is because you have these major companies who normally sell chips to China. And as you know, China is the largest manufacturing country in the world. They make everything, IoT devices, laptops, mobiles, every single thing. And most of it is electrical. So everything needs chips. And these American companies are now struggling to kind of sell their most advanced chips. And their most advanced chips are used for computers and other advanced things in China. And the United States is trying to stop all that. And this is why their shares are going down, because if you cannot sell to your biggest market, your share as a company is going to go down, and you'll have less money, less revenues. That means you're going to have to let people go. Yes, there's going to be less jobs, and there's going to be less money for research and development. So it just doesn't make any sense why US is doing that to its business and its companies. And also, let me tell you something. If you are a company who is using US technology for chips, and the US is going to try and control you, they're going to tell you where to sell, where not to sell, what to do. They're going to try and control you, say, oh, this is our technology. You can't sell to China. You can't do this. You can't do that. You as a company, you're in a serious position, because you can't run your business as you would normally in a free trade environment. So what are you going to do in the long term? You're going to try and find ways to get away from US technology. So all of these companies in Netherlands, like ASML, companies in Japan, they're going to find ways to not to use US technology. And this is what it says here. You can see here, companies in both countries are believed to be able to build products that do not relying on US technology. So even though these companies in Japan, even though the companies in Netherlands are not using US technology, United States is still trying to force them not to sell to China. I mean, good luck to that. Let's see how that works. I mean, it says that, if you're a friend of the United States, then it's fatal. And they said if you're an enemy, then it's dangerous, but if you're a friend, it's fatal. This is exactly what it's like. The United States is now going around the world telling countries who to sell to, who not to sell to. It doesn't matter if you're using US technology or not. You got to listen to me, or else you're either with us or against us. And this is how it is at the moment. And the long term, right? Long term, companies around the world are going to look at this, think, you know what, guys, screw this American technology. We'll build our own technology. Let's build something that doesn't use US technology, because we don't want them to come around knocking on our door saying, oh, you're using our technology. You're not allowed to sell to China. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that. So the long term is not looking good for United States, because these companies are going to find ways not to use US technology, and they'll sell to whoever they want. I mean, good luck if the United States come around knocking on your door and say, oh, you can't sell to China. And if you say, why not? Oh, because we don't like them, and you are using our technology. And that's what companies are doing now, saying, no, we're not using your technology. This is our technology. This is our patent. So get the hell out. You can't tell me what to do. So this is what's going to be happening in the future. Companies are going to be pushing to get away from United States technology. And I haven't even started about China. I haven't even started what this is going to be doing to China. This is going to fast track Chinese development, because this is China is spending up to 400 billion on chips. So if they can invest most of that money into their own chip development and build up their own ecosystem, and in a few years, they don't have to be controlled by United States or threatened with these chip builds and stuff like that. And if you're a company in China, and if all of these US companies are banned from selling to China, these Chinese companies will come up, get a lot of funding from the Chinese government, and in a few years, they'll be able to sell to their own market. And eventually, these Western companies will be thrown out. And this is what's happened in China. If you just look at the history, for example, at one point, China was not allowed to compete or go into the International Space Station. I don't know why it's called International Space Station, because United States, it's only for United States, its allies. So it's not really international. It's basically, if you're a friend of the United States and you basically are a puppet of the United States, then you'll be allowed to go into the International Space Station. Otherwise, you're not. So China at one point were not allowed to go into the International Space Station, and China decided to build their own. And now they have surpassed the United States in so many ways. They've got their new space station. They're looking to build a base on the moon with Russia. So they're well ahead of the United States in many aspects. And right now they are behind in the chip sector, but it's not going to take them long to catch up. And I'm going to kind of talk about how. I'm going to show you some facts and figures over the next few slides. So this article, you can see why China's big chip breakthrough has rattled the US. So the reason the US is doing all of this is because there's a company in China who has built a 7-nanometer semiconductor, and they are selling that to companies. And I believe this is basically They're selling it to they're already selling it to a company, and this 7 nanometer is a huge issue for United States, and they are completely shocked because they did not think that China has the capability to build 7 nanometers. And this has come at a really fast rate as well, because if you think about Chinese development, China has only developed over the last 20, 30 years, or 20 or 30 years. Before that, they were very poor. um, they didn't really have much of a technology sector. It wasn't until they joined the World Trade Organization and all of these companies started moving into China, and China started doing lots of joint ventures. They started doing a lot of technology transfers, and China obviously built their own technology and learned from these Western companies, and started building their own and developing their own technologies. And now look how fast they have built up their technologies over the past 20 or 30 years. And this is completely legal, guys. I mean, people that, United States like to kind of throw some stories around that, China stole technology, this and that. Nobody stole technology. All these American companies, nobody put a gun to these American companies that went to China and decided to do these joint ventures with China. No, nobody put a gun to their heads. Basically, these companies wanted to go to China because there was cheap labor, you know, cheap goods, everything was cheap, and they left American shores and decided to build up their factories in Chinese shores. They didn't have any problems about sharing technology with the Chinese back then, because they still thought at the time China was not capable of innovation and Chinese people were not capable of innovation. So these companies were going around, you know, doing technology transfers, and it's all legal, it's all above board. And Chinese, they learned from that and they've built their own industry. And like I said, nobody put a gun to these companies' heads to go all the way to China. They did it for the money because they know going to China will save them a lot of costs. And this is how capitalism works. When these companies have so much power, and all they want is to save costs. And if they can save 1p or 2p making these products, they will do it. They don't care about the people of the United States or the government. They only care about money. So obviously China has built up its technology over the past 20, 30 years very, very fast. And I'm giving you an example as a space station, but there's many examples how China has developed its own technology. They've managed to build their own jet engine. They've managed to build their own 5th generation fighter. They've managed to build their own airplane. And, there's many examples, guys, many, many examples. They build their own solar sector, the wind generation, AI. I'm going to probably do a separate video on it to kind of show you the kind of technological advances that China has made over the years. But this really has freaked out the United States, because China was able to sell the 7 nanometers to other companies, and this really, really has freaked them out. And this is why couple of weeks later, you see this bill coming out, and they're trying to put more sanctions on China to kind of stop them. But it's not going to stop them. It is. It's actually going to push China to kind of do better, because the way the Chinese look at this, they feel absolutely humiliated the way the United States is treating them. And this is going to push the Chinese even more to work harder. And you got 1.4 billion people in China, basically all with the same kind of mentality. They all want to kind of be better. They know the United States has put these illegal sanctions on them, so they want to kind of make sure China does not fall. China actually gets past them. And Chinese people work hard, and also a lot of Chinese that have been working abroad, like in United States, also are moving back into the mainland as well. So they've got a lot of skills that they've been building up in the West, and now a lot of them are going back into China, which I'm going to kind of cover in the next few slides later on. But in the beginning, let's kind of carry on. So this is what America's been doing. You can see America must beware of backing China into a corner. So this is what happens when you back an animal into a corner. They have no choice but to fight back, and United States is giving China no choice but to fight back. You know, if you go back before the Trump era, before Trump placed these sanctions, China was happy to buy chips worth 400 billion, 500 billion. They were happy to pay that amount. They did not build their own, semiconductor industry because the whole world at the time was working together. They had a supply chain that was working throughout the world. You know, companies were buying goods from all over the world, and every country had its own advantage. People were exporting, importing. The whole world was working like clockwork. And if you don't believe me, watch a film called 2012. And 2012 is a film about the end of the world, how the sea levels rise and destroy the world. And back then, the Chinese were the good guys. And this was 2012, this film was called. So just over 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there was no problem with the Chinese whatsoever because the Americans were too busy fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were too busy killing Muslims. They weren't even thinking about the Chinese back then. So 2012, basically, the world is ending. And the Americans decided to work with the Chinese, and the Chinese built these arcs, these massive ships, and they built it by, destroying mountains in Tibet and stuff. They built it, and America provided the technology. And it's kind of one of those things where the whole world kind of worked together. They built these arcs. Every country kind of contributed to that arc, and it's like a real international space station where every country in the world kind of put something in it. And they built these arcs, massive arcs, and they built it in the Tibetan mountains, because the Tibetan mountains, they call it the roof of the world, because in terms of, those mountains are literally the highest point on Earth. And if the Earth ever got flooded, that is where you need to be, because those Tibetan mountains are very, very high. And obviously, about the Everest mountain, but there's other mountains as well around the Tibetan area, which are very, very high. And, if the world is sinking, that's the place to go. So they built them there. They built these 3 arcs, and it just kind of shows how the world kind of worked together, what the strengths of the Chinese are, what the strengths of the Americans are, and they kind of work together, and they built these arcs, and at the end of the day, a lot of important people went into those arcs, and humanity was saved. Even though the world was destroyed, humanity was saved. And eventually the water went down, and when the water went down, humanity rebuilt itself again. So the whole point is, when you work together as a collective, the world wins. It's a win-win situation for everyone. But when you don't, then it's just a lose-lose for everyone. And this is what's happening. America is backing China into a corner, and China has got no choice but to fight. And they're fighting by building up their own semiconductor industry. Before Trump, they did not need a semiconductor industry. They didn't feel they had to. They were happily buying stuff from rest of the world, and there was no issues. It wasn't until Huawei got banned and the Chinese realized that we need to have our own semiconductor industry, because the Americans can place these sanctions on us, on any company at any point, and destroy the company or any country by doing that. So it wasn't until then China decided to build their own semiconductor industry. And they are building it. It's going to take time. I'm not saying this is something they can do overnight. It probably will take between 5 to 10 years. But this is a very slow process. You have to think about building the whole ecosystem. It's not just about building the chips. It's building the ecosystem. You need to be able to build the machines. You need to have the right people with the right skills. You need to have all the raw materials. You need to have companies making the glass, the mirror, the laser. There's a lot of components that go into building these lithography machines, and a lot of technology goes into it. So it's not something you can do overnight. You need a lot of time for this. But think about it, guys. I mean, 7 nanometers was something that the world, like Intel, was selling like 10 years ago. But how long has Intel been around? Intel has been around for ages. I think, uh, I remember Intel has been around. Is one of the first companies which invented the chip, and that was way back. I can't remember the exact date, but let's say 60, 70, 80 years ago, um, probably 1950s, 94. I don't know, but Intel's been around for ages, and it took them that long to come up with 7 nanometers, but it took China like 10 years to get up to 7 nanometers. So you have to think about it in that sense. China is very new to this semiconductor market, but they are going along very fast, and I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 5 years they start going beyond 7 nanometers, start building EUV machines themselves, or other technologies like photonic chips or graphene chips, and overtake what's already on the market. So this article says broader ban on ASML sales to China will hurt firms' revenue and set back Beijing's domestic chip making drive, analysts say. And it says ASML could lose around 2 billion in revenue if deep DUV technology sales in China are blocked. So the United States is trying to stop DUV technology because it was previously ASML was not allowed to sell EUV machines, but they were allowed to sell DUV machines because the United States thought DUV machines were not the latest generation, so it's fine to sell them. But imagine their shock when China came out with 7 nanometers with DUV machines, and this is why DUV machines are now banned. And ASML obviously they're not happy being told what to do by the United States. Obviously, their revenue is going to be going down. The bad news is China is actually building its own DUV machine, and I believe that's going to be out over the next few years as well. And there's a company called SMEE, and SMEE is a company which is building its own DUV machine, and that's going to be out very soon. AMD, you can see that bad news adds to 725 billion market drop for big chip makers. So AMD, as well as other US firms and Taiwanese firms and South Korean firms, they're going to be losing up to 725 billion, and that's a lot of money. You got to this is not kind of we're not looking at small change here. China is the biggest market at the moment, and the reason is they said it's 725 billion. Obviously China was buying 400 500 billion a few years ago. The reason now it's 725 billion because the rise of IoT machines, the rise of EV cars. We are living in the technological age where everything needs a semiconductor, everything needs a chip. Your fridge needs a chip, everything you work with, everything is smart. Everything is smart. You can have a smart home with everything has a semiconductor, everything you can control with your phone, everything you can control with your voice. We are living in a smart world. So obviously, because of that huge demand of chips, this is why, they're going to lose a lot more than what they thought they would lose. So there's a company called SMIC, and SMIC has been building factories in China, and they are building, obviously, they have built 7 nanometers, and they're also building 14 nanometers and 28 nanometers. They are building 3 factories, by the way, 3 new factories. So this one is in Shenzhen. I wanted to kind of show you these factories. So this one is in Shenzhen for 2.35 billion, and the government is helping funding that. So, and you can see this is in Shenzhen here. And then you have another one in Shanghai. So SMIC is building another 8.87 billion into Shanghai. And they are also building another one, which has been recently announced, 7.5 billion factory in Tianjin. And what a lot of people don't realize or don't understand is 80 or 90% of the chips that are sold around the world are mature chips. And we're talking about 28 nanometers, 14 nanometers, or even 7 nanometers. And SMIC can produce that. So if they can build all of these factories in China, and they will be earning so much revenue because they will be owning 70, 80, 90% of the market. And this is bad news for American companies, because if SMIC takes all the share, all the market in China for these mature nodes, then the American companies are going to be losing out, because before SMIC came along, it was American companies, American chip companies, who were selling in the Chinese market like crazy. And this is why China had to pay 400 billion, 500 billion per year on chips. But obviously now it's going to go up to 700 billion. So imagine all of that money these American companies would lose once these factories come online for SMIC. And if you haven't got shares in SMIC, I'll probably suggest you guys kind of invest in SMIC, because their shares are going to be shooting up over the next few years. It's very cheap at the moment because they are under sanctions. But I can imagine their shares, they're going to be shooting up once these factories are online. And I was talking about the company called SMEE, and you can see SMEE is very close to making a DUV machine. And basically, what it says here is Chinese lithography equipment maker SMEE is reportedly working on a new ARF immersion lithography tool that could, with multiple patterning, be used to make 7 nanometers chips. So if ASML do not sell these lithography machines to China, guess what? SMEE will come into the market and they will sell these lithography machines in China. So ASML will be losing a huge market. And if SMEE can kind of sell these machines in China, they will be producing their revenue. And with that revenue, they'll obviously be putting more money into research and development. They'll be hiring more staff. And they'll be able to kind of improve on what they have and start building more advanced EUV machines. And this is just a start, guys, because at the end of the day, you got to start somewhere. As a company, if you can make a lot of revenue, if you can make a lot of business, if you can sell a lot of stuff in your own market, then you will get the funding from the government, you will get the backing, you will get the people, you will get the money, and you'll be able to kind of improve on what you have. And this is how it works. End of the day, once the American businesses are out, the Chinese businesses will take over and they will develop their own industry. And this is what's happening in Russia. You can see Russia, all of these companies are moving out of Russia, but they are being replaced by Russian companies. And locally, that's only a good thing for Russia. Also, Chinese companies are moving as well. So the bad news for TSMC, and this is coming from the Taipei Times. So I just want to say this is Taipei Times, because this is not a fake article, because I mentioned this in one of my previous videos, and somebody said, "Oh, this is a fake." So how can it be fake if it's coming from the Taipei Times? And Taipei Times is obviously from Taiwan, and they know TSMC better than anyone. And Taipei Times is saying that companies like NVIDIA, AMD are cutting orders because they're not selling in China. They're cutting orders, and TSMC is forced to shut down their EUV machines. And you can see here, the order cut has led to TSMC shut down 4 extreme ultraviolet EUV lithography machines, which roll out high-end chips, the report said. So when you have 4 extreme EUV machines shut down, imagine your loss as a company. These EUV machines are bloody expensive. We're talking about, millions and millions, if not like, we're talking about billions if you add all of the everything that comes with it. Let's say billions these machines cost. They're not cheap, And imagine all these, you pay for like billions worth of equipment and they just sitting around in a warehouse and you're not using them. It's like you're running a football team and you buy the most expensive player, but you don't play him. You just put him on the bench. It's just a waste of money, right? I mean, what is the point? And this is why TSMC is crying at the moment, because if a lot of these companies are cutting orders because they can't sell to China, then the whole supply chain, the whole everything is linked. Even TSMC is going to suffer. So as a company, TSMC, who have spent billions in buying these EUV machines, and now they have to sit on the bench gathering dust. It's not really a good look. And this is why TSMC's shares have been going down. You can see, it's gone down pretty badly. From the heights of 661, it's gone down to around 382. So I want to come to this article now. The US is losing scientists to Asia, to China. How to stem the flow. So this article tells you that in 2021 alone, 1,400 Chinese scientists left the United States for China. Inflow of Chinese students is also on the decline. So this is a major problem. A lot of these US Chinese scientists who have been learning the trade in the United States, they're all now moving back into China, and they're helping the local businesses, helping the local companies build up the tech sector using their skills. And there's a reason for that, which I'm going to go into. And you can see here, increasing number of Chinese researchers leaving the US out of fear. So the previous article was 2021, but if you look at this one tells you a different figure. You can see here, 1,300 Chinese-born faculty members across the country between December 2021 and March 2022 said they have left or leaving the country. And you can see here, around 61% said they feel pressured to leave the country. And this is the problem, really. They are feeling pressured because the Chinese are being heavily victimized in China. And one of the main reasons for that is this guy. So there's a Chinese scientist in United States, and they basically victimized him to death. And you can see how a federal push to stop Chinese scientists from stealing US secrets has spluttered in court. So they basically ruined a Chinese scientist's life, and he basically got acquitted. They threw the case out of court because there was no evidence. And you can see how he was treated here. Investigators secretly surveyed him for more than a year. According to court documents, they seized his electronic devices, they grilled him and his employers. February 2020, FBI arrested him. They took him to jail. They charged him with 6 felonies, could have landed him in prison for decades. But the Justice Department efforts to convict Hu as part of this program to crack down on illicit technology transfer to China failed spectacularly. A judge acquitted him last month after a lengthy trial offered little evidence of anything other than paperwork misunderstanding. So you can see how Chinese scientists in United States are being treated. They are being victimized. And this guy, went through years of FBI surveillance. They put him in jail, treated him like a piece of shit, and they expect all these other Chinese scientists to sit there and take it. And the Chinese community is a very small community. When one thing happens to one person, all the Chinese know about it. Trust me, everyone will know about it. Everyone in China will know about it. All the Chinese around the world will know about it. Because and the way they treated this scientist was absolutely disgusting, And I've seen some of the clips in the courtroom, and the way they were using the language, the way they were using the language against him and the language against China is absolutely disgusting. And this is why a lot of scientists are leaving United States because of fear, because how they get victimized. And you can see how Americans in Chinese tech firms might have to choose between US citizenship and the job. And I will come to this in a bit, but this is the main reasons. They are being victimized. They are leaving out of fear, as you can see, leaving the US out of fear, and I don't blame them. And when they leave the US, the Chinese mainland will open them up, open up with their hands held high, and they'll greet them. They'll give them a super salary. They'll look after them. They'll look after the family. They'll give them a great life compared to the United States, where the FBI will be looking at you, the FBI will be after you, putting you in jail, and things like that. So a lot of scientists, Chinese scientists, are moving back into China, and this is good news for China because this will develop their tech sector much faster. They will have all the skills. But this is bad news for the United States, because anybody that works in the tech sector knows that, there's a lot of Chinese in top positions in the tech sector, because the Chinese work very hard. A lot of, there's a lot of Chinese in the tech sector, and the figures speak for themselves. You're welcome to Google it. There's also big Indian contingent as well. But mainly is Chinese. So all of them are moving back into the mainland, and this is only going to be good for mainland China. One of the other things the United States tried to do is, during this chip build, that if you're an American, you're working for a Chinese tech firm, you have to choose between US citizenship and the job. And during this chip build, a lot of Americans have been leaving their posts in China or Chinese companies. They felt that they had no choice, because they could have left. They didn't want to lose their citizenship. And I think this was a very nasty thing to do. In a court of law, this will not hold. This is something that the government is probably threatening these people to do. But in reality, this will not be this will not go any further in a court of law. There is no way they can kick someone out. They could lose their US citizenship just because of a company they work for, or working for a Chinese company. And it's absolutely ridiculous how they are scaremongering people from working in China or working for Chinese companies. And all of this is just going to bite United States back in the arse. All of this stuff, it's not good working environment. It doesn't show that US is welcoming. It doesn't show that US, believes in free trade, freedom to work wherever you want. It doesn't show that the US is playing fair. They're playing very, very nasty, and they're victimizing Chinese working in the United States. They're victimizing people working for Chinese firms, and it just doesn't show US in a good light. And I think all of this is just going to backfire on them. And I believe all of this is an act of desperation, because they are absolutely freaking out, because China has come to the 7-nanometer level, and slowly they will get to that 5 nanometers and 3 nanometers, and they will catch up with the rest of the world. Like Taiwan at the moment, they are testing their 3 nanometers, which will be in mass production very soon. So 3 nanometers is kind of the place to go. There are other companies like Samsung who have gone to 2 nanometers, I believe. But we'll see. The lower you go, the more expensive it is. So to go from 5 nanometers to 3 nanometers is just so much more expensive. Also, your yields go down. Like when I say yields, like if you build 10 of these chips, you'll find that 5 of them don't work and the other 5 are working fine. That's, basically your yield gets worse and worse lower you go. And so that's a problem, really. But, as with Moore's law, I believe we are coming to the end of silicon chips. It's getting more and more expensive to kind of go lower and lower when it comes to 3 nanometers or 2 nanometers and 1 nanometer, and it's getting too expensive, guys. And each of these ASML machines costs billions, and it's just not worth it. And how long are you going to last? If somebody finds another way to make these chips cheaper, then all of your billions of investments has just gone down the drain. Um, I believe that there are other ways to make it cheaper. China is focusing on photonic chips, graphene chips. Japan is coming out with a technology next year called NIL. They are building NIL machines which are able to produce 5 nanometers, but it's very, very cheap. The costs are like 1/10 of EUV machines, and also it uses 1/10 of the energy as well. These EUV machines are very energy intensive. They take a lot of energy. They need a lot of water. But Japan is building this NIL machines, and I'm pretty sure, you know, the Chinese are literally waiting in the wings to buy those, because NIL is not using any US technology. It's all Japan technology. And I'm sure Japan will not want to kind of destroy their own business by not selling to the Chinese industry. So they will be selling to China. China will be going to 5 nanometers very soon. They are building their own kind of ecosystem with 5 nanometers, 3 nanometers, even with photonic chips, graphene chips. China is also building up their skills as well. All of their main universities are having semiconductor courses, degrees, and a lot of Chinese students are doing that because they want to help their country. So a lot of students are going into that field, and there's a lot of clever students in that field as well, which are going to be graduating over the next year or two. So China is getting there. They are building their own ecosystem. They're building their own machines. They do not need US technology anymore. And pretty soon they're going to be completely self-sufficient. If you want to bet against them, you're welcome to. But one thing I can guarantee you: never bet against the Chinese. If you push them against a corner, they will fight. They will find a way to get over any problem, whatever it is.